Hello. How are you guys doing today? Let me know how you're feeling. And I'm just going to get started. Let me know if you're joining live. Say hi. If you're watching the replay, hashtag replaying, say hi. Yeah, and just start telling me like what your thoughts are on perfectionism, or how you feel it shows up in your life, any examples that you have in your practice or at home, what you think it actually means to be perfectionistic. Love to know. I'm just going to wait a minute or two so that anyone who still wants to join can join us. Able to see myself. All right. Trying to see, make sure I can see the comments as well. So, okay. I'm going to get started. So yeah, say hi. Let me know what your thoughts are on perfectionism, how it shows up in your life. So I'm Sarah. I'm your health and recovery coach for women clinicians. And today we're talking about perfectionism. And I think this is a really important topic because it is a trait or a tendency that is very high in female healthcare professionals. So the chances of you being a perfectionist and being in this group is highly likely. And we are often more likely to suffer from things like burnout, stress, anxiety, etc., if we have perfectionistic tendencies. So yeah, chances of you being in this group again and being a perfectionist are quite high. And essentially, we want to think about it as like, how is perfectionism getting in the way of being the clinicians we want to be, being the people we want to be, being the partners we want to be, etc. And where does it come from? Why do we have these kinds of tendencies? Some definitions around it, just exploring that. How can we start to make shifts into a new direction, into a new way of behaving? And the definition of perfectionism I want to read from Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown. So her definition is, and she says this is what emerged from the research: perfectionism is a self-destructive and addictive belief system that fuels this primary thought: if I look perfect, live perfectly, work perfectly, and do everything perfectly, I can avoid or minimize the painful feelings of shame, judgment, and blame. So essentially, it's the way that we are behaving in order to avoid certain uncomfortable experiences. And it's fueled by the sense of like, I need to do more in order to be enough, to be worthy. I need other people to accept me. I need other people to approve of me. I need to always look like I know what I'm doing. I always need to look like I know the answers, be doing things well, never look like I'm failing or making mistakes. Everything needs to look perfect. Otherwise, I'm going to have the shame, the judgment, and the blame. So it's a way for us to protect ourselves from that. And I think it's really important to honor the fact that this develops as a protective behavior, or a way that we kind of learned that this is how we need to be in the world in order to essentially earn our sense of worthiness and our place in the world. So just recognizing that it developed from somewhere. There was some point in your life where, or multiple points in your life, where you learned this as a way of behaving. And like I said, it's very common in women healthcare professionals, women in general, very common. And then if you tend to be someone who went into a helping profession, things like perfectionism and people pleasing, and any profession where you have to have quite a high level of skill and achievement, you also are likely to have high levels of perfectionism. So it's essentially around this theme of like, I'm trying to protect myself from an image of not having it all together, not being perfect, not doing things well, not being smart, not being essentially worthy. So yeah. So the two things she mentioned is it's destructive and it is reinforcing. So kind of it reinforces itself, or it's addictive is the way she put it. So the reason why it's destructive and the reason why it's not the same as gaining mastery or excellence in something, which we'll go into more in detail. The reason that it's destructive is because if you think about it, there is no way for something or someone to be absolutely perfect. Like it literally doesn't exist. If you have to think about you at work, what would be you being perfect at your job? It means never making a mistake. It means never not knowing the answer. It means never failing. It means never disappointing anyone or having them think less of you. It's literally impossible to have that. So we're always going to fail at it, right? We're like setting ourselves up for failing at this goal of perfection, right? And it's also based on other people's perception of us. So the core question is like, what will people think? It's a very external way of perceiving ourselves, right? We're worrying about what other people perceive of us. We're worrying how other people see us and judge us, and what they think of us, how smart they think we are, how good they think we are at what we do, whether they are approving and accepting of us, right? It's very externally based on what people think, their perceptions of us. And we can never control other people's perceptions of us. Even if we are incredible at our jobs, there are people who are still going to think we're not good at our jobs because of what they perceive someone who is good at their job would do, right? So we can never control other people's perceptions of us, no matter how hard we try. So that's why it's destructive. It doesn't exist. You can't be perfect, and you can't control other people's perceptions of you. And it's also reinforcing or addictive, because if you already believe that the reason you that there's something wrong with you if you are making mistakes, if you are failing, if you are not knowing the answer, or if you're disappointing people, if you already think that that signifies something wrong with you, then when that happens, and it will inevitably happen, you essentially will just reinforce the same behaviors. You're like, look, see, it's like I am flawed. There's something wrong with me. I need to do better. I need to, get my shit together, whatever it is. It reinforces itself all the time, and it becomes addictive. So what is the downside of this, right? People who do have perfectionistic tendencies will have experienced a lot of these things, but we are much more likely to suffer from things like anxiety, things like depression. Think about it, like the anxiety part. If you're constantly worrying about making a mistake, of looking bad, of failing, of disappointing people, like you can just imagine how anxious that would make you feel. Depression, like imagine if you translate not being perfect as you are not worthy, or there's something inherently flawed and wrong with you. Like you can see how that would lead to feelings of depression and low self-worth. People often struggle with addiction. Another way to kind of manage that discomfort and manage the feelings around depression and anxiety, right? A lot of addiction is related to that as well. And then life paralysis is what she calls it, and Brene Brown calls it. And life paralysis essentially encompasses like all of the things, the opportunities, the way of living, the authenticity, the joy, the confidence, everything that we would be missing out on because we are so scared of doing things wrong, because we are so scared of failing, of making mistakes, of getting it wrong, of being wrong, of being a disappointment, of being a burden, all those kinds of things. And people pleasing is sort of I guess you could say like a subset of perfectionism, because it is a similar thing of like wanting to be perfect for a specific reason, and it will be more based on, like rejection and people not being pleased with you, people not liking you, that you base your self-worth on whether people are happy with you, people think that you're nice, people are pleased with your behavior, etc. It's like the good girl way of behaving, right? So they are related in that they both are perfectionism in some sense, like you're trying to be perfectly pleasing or perfectly nice and perceived as this kind of person. And they're both very externally driven. So it's not about genuinely being kind, even if someone doesn't perceive you as kind. It's about being nice, right? I want to have people perceive me as a nice person, as a good person, irrelevant how like what the actual, underlying motivation is. I want that perception. I'm worrying about what will people think. So yeah, life paralysis, basically all those things that we are missing out on because of people pleasing or perfectionism. And I think sometimes we say it as, oh, I just have very high standards, or I just want to do things so well. And it's a similar thing that I sometimes say about people pleasing, where we say, oh, it's just because I'm too nice, right? And I get the reason that we say those kinds of things, but I think it makes us less likely to change, because firstly, we're seeing it as something that is intentional, something that we decided to do, which it's usually not. It's usually what do you call it? Compulsive, it's protective, it's automated, and you can literally think about it. If I had to do the opposite of this behavior, I would freak out. Like, I don't even feel like it's possible for me. Think about like you decided that you're going to work certain hours and only take a certain amount of patients on. Someone phones you and they want an appointment, right? That very compulsive saying yes, even when you decided that you weren't going to take on that patient, that is not being nice, because it's not intentional. But also the other aspects of it is we're pretending it's not destructive, right? We're pretending no one's getting hurt by this. And usually in the long term, the other person can sometimes be hurt by it. But usually in the short term, it's more us that are it's more ourselves that are being harmed by this behavior, right? Because you were not going to see those patients, and then you felt like you couldn't say no. Like if you literally feel like you can't say no even though you want to, that is going to obviously make you book more patients than you're expecting to see, and that will happen compulsively and habitually, and you will start to get exhausted and resentful and start to feel burnt out. So I just want us to be careful of having this idea that it's intentional and that it's a good thing, because if we think those two things, we are unlikely to change. We need to recognize and take responsibility for the fact that it is protective. We are doing it for a certain reason. We are doing it to avoid certain discomfort, or any discomfort that we associate with conflict or judgment or blame or disappointing people thinking that we're not nice. And then recognizing that there is a downside to it. There is a destructive element to it. It's not just a good thing, right? And so related to that, when we think about, so I'm just going to take a sip of water. If you're joining us live, say hi. Let me know what's resonating with you and what your experiences have been with these kinds of behaviors. And if you're watching the replay, you can also let me know, just hashtag replay, and let me know your comments and questions as well. Also welcome. Okay, so when we think of genuinely having like high standards and wanting to be excellent at something and wanting to do it really well, right? Like, I think a lot of us have a really deep desire to be really good at what we do and to be excellent at what we do. But think about it like this, right? If we had to design a way for you to be excellent at what you do, what would be the conditions that we would create, right? We'd want to create curiosity so that you are learning. And we also want to have things like mistakes and failures as things that are helping you learn along the way, right? Like think of a child that is learning a sport, right? Let's say they're learning soccer. Imagine the difference between a parent saying, okay, you're going to go learn how to play soccer, but don't you dare miss a goal ever. Don't you ever like make a mistake on the field. Don't you ever like come home not having won the match that you were playing, or whatever it is. Like expecting that child to, from the beginning, never fail, never do anything wrong. The child is not going to learn that sport very well, right? Not to mention he's going to be anxious and base his self-worth on his performance and, you know, all those kinds of things. Whereas if you have a child who's learning a sport, we know that the best thing for them is to make as many mistakes as they can, right? That is how they learn. It literally is how they learn. You make a mistake, you learn from it. You make a mistake, you learn from it, right? Shooting between the goalposts, right? You have to miss so many times in order to get good at what you're doing. But we don't tend to apply the same logic when we are trying to be good at our jobs. We just think, I must never make a mistake. I must never fail. I must always know the answer, you know, like all these kinds of things, which are literally detrimental to us learning and being good at what we do. So we need to feel safe enough in order to get it wrong, in order to learn from our mistakes. Otherwise, we will never actually get good at what we do, and we won't innovate and create. Those things literally need us to be safe with failure and safe with getting it wrong. We're willing to get it wrong. Every time we get it wrong, it shows us something. We learn from it, right? So it's just a very different approach. And if we genuinely are seeking mastery and excellence, we would not be scared of not knowing the answer. In fact, we'd seek situations where we don't know the answer because that's how we learn, right? Or we would seek to make mistakes and learn from them because we know that's how we get better at what we do. I remember very strongly feeling like I want to just like lock myself away for like 5 to 10 years and just like learn everything, right? Like never like learn every case that has ever been, like learn the textbook in and out. I literally felt that I was doing a disservice to my patients by seeing them before I was like excellent at what I do, right? It was just like such a warped way, because we know that the way that we get so good at what we do is seeing patient after patient after patient and learning from that experience and making mistakes and realizing, oh, this is how this works. Seeing how different cases present in different people, seeing the reality of how variable humans are, right? Like when you're reading a textbook, you have no idea. And then you start seeing patients and you realize like, oh, like they don't follow the textbook, right? But the way that we actually get good at our jobs is so different to how we approach it when we are seeing it as defective, when we are making mistakes or failing or getting it wrong. And for example, another example for me is I always had this this thing about being smart, right? Like, and this is where you can kind of look at like where did these patterns develop? Where did they come from, right? Where did you learn that your worth is dependent on your achievements or how good you are to people, how nice you are, how much you please people? Like, where did you learn those patterns? And it's not to blame people or to say like my childhood was terrible or it was traumatic or whatever. It's literally just saying like, where might I have learned that that's actually how I need to operate in this life, right? And one of the ways is if it's something that you were praised for or something that was like modeled to you. And sometimes it genuinely is like traumatic or abusive situations where you learn that this is how I need to be in order to be safe, right? Like if someone has an alcoholic parent that has like these rage attacks, that person learns how to be as like unthreatening and as quiet and as good and whatever it is as possible. They can actually be, really traumatic reasons why we develop these. But it doesn't have to be that. Sometimes it's just, how did we learn these patterns? And so, for example, for me, like one of the things that I was praised for was like academics and marks. And there was this identity around being smart. I enjoy like the perspective of telling kids that it's not, or not saying to kids, you are smart, but that was a smart thing that you just did, or whatever it is. Like you are not making their identity from their behaviors, right? But that was an identity I developed, but I also developed such an anxiety around not being smart, and such an anxiety about never about like being in a situation where I didn't know the answer. And what happens is when you are so when you base your self-worth on whether or not you always know the answer and whether or not you are smart, then you will literally not put yourself in a situation where you are a less smart person than the people in that room, right? And if you think about like what is actually going to make me learn more and be smarter, is learning from people who are smarter than I am, who are going to challenge me intellectually, right? But if I'm never allowing myself to be in those situations because I'm so scared of looking not smart, you can see how it's literally going to be in opposition to a genuine goal of like learning and curiosity and knowing more and understanding more and excellence and all those kinds of things. So we want to get clear of like, what is the goal? And then is this way of thinking and behavior actually helping me achieve that? Or is it just protecting me from the discomfort? And you can start to think about what is the discomfort that I am protecting myself from the most? Like, what am I so scared of happening if I had to do the opposite behavior? So let's say you didn't like, let's say you always want to know the answer, right? Let's say someone says, do you know the name of this disease or whatever? And you're like, yeah, of course, because you don't want people to think you're not smart. What would be so scary about doing the opposite and saying like, no, actually, I don't know? Or saying like, I know we learned this at school, but it's been a long time since that, and it's not something that I use on a daily basis, so I actually don't remember. Or it's not something that I, in my like line of work, that is really significantly important. So with all the amount of information that we have to learn, like that's just one of the things that, like accepting that that's sometimes what happens, right? What is scary, what is uncomfortable about doing the opposite, about not pretending to know, but actually admitting like, oh no, I don't know, or I don't know very much about it. Like, please tell me, like, what is the, you can give me the answer, right? What are you protecting yourself from with these behaviors? And a way to do that is to think of think of a typical behavior that you would see as perfectionist, whether that's more towards like people pleasing or more perfectionism, like whether you, with that example, like you book a patient when you said you weren't going to, or you don't maintain a boundary, or you feel like if you don't get all your patients better, or if you don't always know the answer, that they will be judging you or whatever, like and so you pretend, or you are anxious about it, and you study something for days before a patient or whatever it is. Like if you had to just do the opposite of some of these behaviors, what would be like about that? Right? Like what would be the resistance? What would be the discomfort? What are you scared of happening? And that's a way to just identify what you're actually protecting yourself from. And I think a lot of us because we see it as, I just have high standards, or I just want to do things well. When we think of essentially like healing from perfectionism or doing things differently, we think of like, oh, but then I'm going to have low standards, or I'm just going to do everything badly, or whatever it is. Like we go to the opposite extreme. And I just want to share a quote by a lady called Samara Bay. And she says, the opposite of perfect is not defective, it's alive. And alive meaning like, if we are not the whole time protecting ourselves, restricting ourselves, monitoring other people, like how should we behave, how are they perceiving me, how are they judging me, right? We get to just live. We get to be confident. We get to be joyful. We get to experiment with things. We get to be innovative. We get to add variety to our lives, and we get to explore deepening of our relationships, right? We get to live so much more fully and so much more lively, with so much more aliveness and so much more openness and curiosity and joy, when we are not having that restriction of, I need to be perfect, I need to never be failing, I need to never be disappointing people. So we need to recognize what we're protecting ourselves from. We need to recognize that it's not something that we're choosing, or something that we are that is good for us, right? Or that is good for the world. So I think part of shifting away from that is just acknowledging those things. That yes, this is a protective pattern that developed, that is helping me be protected from judgment, from shame, from blame, right? This is something that reinforces itself and keeps proving itself to me, even if it's actually not true. So just acknowledging all these things. And then also, one of the things that we really want to develop, and this is essentially a stage in adult development, right? We think about developing all the way to like teenage, and then we almost think of like, once you're an adult, you just stop developing, right? Which is not true. And the journey of growth in adulthood is this journey from essentially an external orientation to internal. So one of the terms for it is self-authorship. So building such a strong internal sense of worth, of I know that I am XYZ. I know that if I fail, that I'm going to be there for myself, that I'm going to be compassionate towards myself. I know that I'm going to create the internal safety that I need in order to be able to, say something to someone, set a boundary, say no. So it's creating like this internal environment that you get your worth from, your safety from, your validation from, your acceptance from, instead of needing that from the outside. And that's not to say we don't need relationships, that we don't need, loving, accepting relationships with other people. Of course we do. But I like to think about it as like, we have this cake, and like we are making the cake. We like have that, and whatever other people are providing us with in terms of like validation and acceptance and praise and whatever it is just like toppings on the cake, right? It's not the whole thing. We don't need it. It's nice to have, right? And it feels good. And we want to surround ourselves with people who celebrate us and who love us and who do think we're amazing, right? That's awesome. But we're not needing that. We're not getting it from that. We have such a strong internal sense of worth, of safety, of love, that we're not needing it from other people in terms of acceptance and praise and thinking that we're nice. So yeah, those are the things that I wanted to chat about when it comes to perfectionism. Let me know it resonated. Let me know what kind of things you also tend to struggle with when it comes to this. And just start exploring, like, where did it develop? What are you protecting yourself from? How can I start creating internal safety that allows me to start moving away from these patterns in a way that isn't going to make me freak out and feel unsafe and feel threatened, right? We need to acknowledge that and respect that and be moving forward. If this is something that you want to book a mini coaching session for, if you think like, this is what I tend to do and I don't know how to like break out of this pattern, and you want to take this kind of information, like you kind of like, I can see that that would be helpful, but like it doesn't feel like that's accessible to me, right? Then book a mini coaching session. I'll always put them in the comments of the live, but it lives in the group description. Those are always available for you. They are part of what you get as a member of this community, right? So you can just book it, it's free. We do a half-hour session and we just choose one thing that you're struggling with and we coach around that and we help you get the next action step that will start getting you momentum in the direction that you want. So book that if this is something that you struggle with, whether it's people pleasing or perfectionism. And yeah, let's carry on the conversation. Have an awesome Sunday. Bye.